Same. Continue. Invitation, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. Swims award paper. I invite chairpersons Dr. Sampath Kumar, sir, Dr. B.S. Reddy, sir, Dr. N. Perumalu, sir, and Dr. N. Subramaniam, sir.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
Good morning, all.
Morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, sir.
In this SWIMS award paper session, we have selected after scrutiny 6 papers into the contestant, and these 6 papers were already given the message to the presenters. The time is total 10 minutes, 8 minutes for presentation and 2 minutes for discussion. Each part of the presentation will have its own marks, so kindly stick on to your timings.
The first presenter,
So,
Dr. K. Soumya. Topic is study of optical coherence tomography and its correlation with clinical severity in idiopathic Parkinson's disease. Dr. Soumya? Dr. Soumya
She's not logged in.
is logged in.
Few minutes back she was logged in, but now not seen.
Shall we wait or
Next.
we can proceed.
go ahead?
Sir,
Soumya,
sir,
yeah.
sir,
Soumya, yeah. Dr. Soumya,
sir, good morning, sir.
yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir,
Madam,
sir,
please
I'm
share
audible,
your-
sir.
Yes, you're audible. Please start.
Okay, thank you, sir. Is my screen audible, sir?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes,
madam, your
yes.
screen is visible and you are audible.
Sir, shall I start, sir?
Yes, yes, madam.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. I thank the organizing committee for giving me this opportunity. I'm Dr. K. Soumya, a final-year postgraduate resident from Department of Neurology, Andhra Medical College. And today I'm going to present a paper regarding a study of optical coherence tomography and its correlation with clinical severity in idiopathic Parkinson's disease. So Parkinson's disease is one of the most common neurodegenerative movement disorders, and its incidence is increasing worldwide. We all know that there is dopamine depletion, which predominantly affects not only the basal ganglia but also in other parts of the brain, that causes many of these non-motor deficits as well as visual apparatus, including certain layers of retina and parts of visual pathway. So this OCT is a non-invasive technology which acquires cross-sectional images of these retinal structures, and measuring this peripheral retinal nerve fiber layer allows an indirect estimation of retinal ganglion cell layer impairment. We have used a UPDRS scale, that is Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale, for rating the severity of the disease, as well as modified HNY staging for rating the severity of the disease. And the main aim and objective of this study was to assess the thickness of retinal nerve fiber layer as well as correlation between this RNFL thickness and severity of the disease. The source of the data were recruited from a Department of Neurology, AMC, and it is a cross-sectional observational study, and the study sample size included 47 people along with 47 controls. The inclusion criteria is over 50 years of age, and those who have fulfilled the UKPDS Brain Bank criteria for diagnosis of idiopathic Parkinson's disease, and those who can undergo the investigations required for the study. And exclusion criteria: any media opacity, glaucoma, history of optic neuritis, any systemic illness precluding optical imaging by OCT, and Parkinson plus syndromes and secondary Parkinsonism. And the study procedure, those who are fulfilling both inclusion and exclusion criteria, and OCT was done, and RNFL thickness was assessed, and clinical grading of severity was done using UPDRS scale and modified HNY scale. And all the statistical analysis were analyzed using SPSS version 23, and these are all continuous variables, these UPDRS scores, and correlation statistics were done to find out the correlation between the OCT and the clinical severity. And the sample was composed of 47 patients. Out of these, the males are 27 and females are 20. Mild, moderate, severe were assessed by means of HNY. Stage 1 and 2 of HNY are taken as mild, and moderate as 3, and severe as 4 and 5. And the controls were males were 30 and females were 17. The RNFL thickness of the patients was compared with the controls and was found to be much thinner in all retinal quadrants, and it was statistically significant, and it was negatively correlated with the duration and severity of the disease. Mainly, you can see here, the inferior quadrant, actually the OCT divides the retinal nerve fiber layer into 4 quadrants: superior, inferior, nasal, and temporal. And here in our group, we have observed that there is much thinning in the inferior quadrant and the temporal quadrant when compared to the other quadrants. And there was average RNFL thickness also decreased in PD group. And with duration of the disease in less than 4 years, it is 88.31 millimeters, and in more than 4 years, it was 72.45 millimeters. So it takes the message of with increasing duration of the disease, the RNFL was much thinner, and it negatively correlated with the duration of the disease, and it was statistically significant. And in average RNFL thickness in patients with severe PD was relatively less, that is around 78.88, though we have a less number of patients in the group of severe PD. But it was significantly correlated. And these are the images from the patients of PD. Here you can see green is the normal one, normal RNFL, and yellow is moderate, and red is much thinned out. And most of these patients has thinning in the temporal quadrants. And these OCT studies show significant reduction of RNFL thickness in PD patients compared to age-matched controls. And this thinning was significant in all the sectors analyzed. And this was similar to the study which was done by Engelberg et al. In 2004. And there were several other studies like from Atlantis et al., Kirbas et al., and Moscow et al., which have identified this mean RNFL thickness. Mean RNFL thickness was much lower in superior, temporal, as well as nasal and inferior quadrants. And the possible explanation for this thickness decrease is that the dopaminergic hemacrin cells, which will be present in the retina, that is inner plexiform layer and retinal ganglionic cell layer, could have been involved early in PD, probably because before the significant damage to the substantia nigra has occurred. And the axons of these ganglion cells form the RNFL. Hence, this loss of these ganglion cells lead to RNFL thinning that can be seen in the natural history of PD. And in some of the studies, they also studied the pre-symptomatic patients with non-motor symptoms of PD, and they have noted that there is RNFL thinning before the substantia nigra has depleted. And the duration of the disease was also found to be significantly correlated with RNFL thickness. And this was also described in a study done by P. Sengupta et al., where they assessed the tremor and bradykinesia duration with the RNFL thickness. So we also studied the relation of OCT findings with clinical severity in these patients, and we used ANOVA to study the influence of scores on OCT findings. And it was also similar to the studies published by Altintis et al. And Satyu et al. But the limitation of this study was it is a cross-sectional study. We need to have a longitudinal study using the same patients, which will provide better information on the course of the disease. And also the sample size is low, and we did not assess the pre-symptomatic patients and non-motor symptoms. And we also did not study the levodopa responsiveness with retinal nerve fiber layer thinning, though we have taken the UPDRS motor off scores for assessing the severity of the disease. And conclusions, there is reduced thickness of retinal nerve fiber layer in patients of IPD, and it also correlated with the severity of the disease. The mean duration of disease was only 3.7 to 1.3 years. The OCT can be used as a retinal biomarker, which is relatively a non-invasive thing, and OCT can be easily available, and it is now available at all places, and we can assess the severity of Parkinson's disease, as well as we can identify the patients who are at risk of PD, who have non-motor symptoms like REM sleep behavioral disorders, anosmia, constipation, and we can follow them with OCT to assess the dopamine depletion. And it can also be used to assess any relation of neurotherapeutics or protective drugs which are used in Parkinson's disease has any effect on this decrease in retinal nerve fiber layer thinning. These
Yes.
are my references, sir.
Dr. Soumya?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Soumya.
Thank
See,
you, sir.
yeah, so as per your study, I think you have done, more assessment for motor symptoms. What about your conclusions for non-motor symptoms like
Yes, sir. Sir, in the mild cases, those we have taken mainly HNY staging, sir, but we also have done the non-motor symptoms, and there was this scale called as Martin et al. Scale, which has this UPDRS correlation with motor HNY, sir, where this mild symptoms, that is UPDRS1 non-motor manifestations, where they have taken mild as 12/13 to 22/24, that correlated with some part of mild disease in HNY staging. So, though we did not actually look at the pure non-motor manifestations and its clinical correlation, but we have equated it with that particular scale. So it was given by Martin et al. Sir. I can have that scores if you allow me to show.
But actually, as per your study, I think when you take the HNY and Unipaid also, it is mostly for motor symptoms.
Yes,
Actually,
sir. Yes, sir.
the motor
Tremor.
assessment scales and
Yes, sir.
correlation of mini-mental states, which go for more of
Yes, sir. Yes.
non-motor symptoms now. And
Yes,
one more,
sir.
based on what is the stage of Parkinson's patients which have progressed to the bigger grades over the period of time with your OCT thickness measurements from baseline to the standard therapy?
Sir, actually, we did not follow up the patients, sir. It was a one-time study, so we did not follow up the we did not follow up the patients, and we also did not assess the whether the patient is on levodopa and there is significant thinning, or we did not check that, sir. We did not follow up the patients.
And one more thing, what is the imaging correlation of your study? Is based upon your only OCT with clinical severity. Is there any imaging correlations you have done?
Sir, actually, for those who are affordable and those who can get, we have done diffusion tensor imaging, sir. But we have done on entire 47 patients, so I did not project it, sir. But we have done diffusion tensor imaging, and we have assessed the fractional anisotropy and mean diffusivity in substantia nigra, which was lower because they are already diagnosed as having idiopathic Parkinson's disease, and they have no other structural abnormalities. And for the exclusion, we have taken. Excuse me, sir. For exclusion criteria, we have taken those who have secondary Parkinsonism symptoms or small vessel ischemic changes, or those who have other Parkinson plus syndromes. We have excluded it, sir, by imaging only, sir. Mainly, we have done baseline MRI, and for some interesting patients, we have also done diffusion tensor imaging, sir.
Actually, if you have used ASL technique to assess the volumetric analysis of the cortical assessment over the period of its OCT, which most cases. At the same time, in OCT, have you done like ganglion cell layer peripheral domain?
Yes, sir. Sir, in OCT, actually, we have taken, there is a protocol, sir, where we have taken the entire area surrounding the optic nerve head for assessing the retinal nerve fiber layer. It is around 3.45 millimeters around optic nerve head. We also looked at the macular volume, macular cube thickness, as well as foveal pit and foveal avascular zone. That is the protocol that we follow for OCT in our regional eye hospital. And mainly, we will assess the peripheral retinal nerve fiber layer because in the previous studies also, it has a significant thinning. Though several other neurodegenerative diseases like AD and all, they will also have thinning, sir. But for PD, there was specific thinning in the inferior and temporal quadrant, which could be explained by less number of dopaminergic amacrine cells in that particular quadrant.
Yeah, that's because.
Sampath, can I ask you a question, Sampath?
Yes, yes, sir.
Sampath, I'm Dr. Gopi. Can I ask you a question?
Please.
Yeah.
Dr. Soumya, what is your observation of OCT in PDD patients? Have you come across any PDD?
Sir, I have,
OCT and PDD.
Sir, OCT in PDD, there is no significant difference between the dementia on PD after dementia and PD patients. Sir. That was similar thinning, but it was more of temporal quadrant thinning. I only have 2 patients of PDD, sir. I could not comment it is
What is
status.
your observation of PDD?
Sir, there was
Is it
thinning.
useful in any other disease?
Yes, sir. It was,
OCT, is it useful?
yes, sir. Yes, sir. For any neurodegenerative disease, OCT can be used, sir. But they have not defined any specific quadrants like for a specific temporal quadrant or inferior quadrant. There is uniform thinning in case of AD and other diseases. Even in multiple sclerosis and NMOSD also, sir, they have observed that with prolonged optic atrophy and repeated recurrent attacks of optic neuritis, there was thinning, sir. But it was not it was not included even the data for several other neurodegenerative conditions. And this OCT is coming up in this PD, sir. There are a lot of studies, and retinopathy in PD, there was a lot of study because they will have a foveal avascular zone impairment and decreased contrast sensitivity, and they will have a visual impairment in addition to the other non-motor manifestations. And
Thank you, Dr. Soumya. I think it's time, and we'll move on to the next paper.
so thank you. Thank you very much.
Dr. Kunal, second
Sir.
presenter. Yeah. Please share your screen, make it full screen.
But I'm not getting that option. I think someone has.
Madam, Soumya, madam, can you please stop your share screen?
I've stopped. I
Yeah,
have stopped.
thank you. Kunal, you can try now.
Yes. Sir. Good morning, everybody. I feel privileged and honored to have this opportunity. My topic is prospective study of complications in neurosurgery and their impact on the health-related quality of life, and proposal of a new complication grading in neurosurgery based on health-related quality of life. Measuring the outcome of surgery is now changed from the traditional endpoints of morbidity, mortality, and average survival to the modern era of health-related quality of life. So with the progression and evolution of neurosurgery, there have been so many classifications to classify complications in neurosurgery, but the recent one, which is most accepted and is being used all over the world, is the one proposed by Lendl-Ibanez et al., which is called Lendl scale, which is grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and grade 4. But Ferroli et al. Pointed lacuna in this treatment-based Lendl scale, and they stressed on the need for inclusion of health-related quality of life in neurosurgical complications. Why? What is the requirement of HRQOL? Health is well, health-related quality of life in relation to the health of the individual is the subjective satisfaction expressed or experienced by the individual in his physical, mental, and social situations. And because it is ultimately the patient who gets affected, whether with the disease or with our surgery. So we choose European Quality of Life Index, which is in short called EuroQol, which has 5 dimensions: mobility, self-care, usual activity, pain or discomfort, and anxiety or depression, each having 5 limbs, which are marked as 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the best score, index score comes out to be 1.0, and the worst score comes out to be 55555, which equates to minus 0.594. So based on these two scores, the maximum possible shift can be either plus or minus 1.594. And based on the permutation and combination, there are 3,125 possible scores are possible, and we have a separate log chart for that. So aims and objective for this study was to study the complications in neurosurgery and classify them as per the Lendl scale, to study the impact of neurosurgical complications on HRQOL using EuroQol model, and to propose a new classification system including or incorporating health-related quality of life. The study was conducted on patients operated between June 2018 to July 2019. A period of 3 months for defining complication was selected for adequacy of the study in limited time period, and patients ages 10 to 17 years were included in the study. Complication was defined as those clinical or clinical radiological abnormality that was not present in the preoperative period or was supposed not to be present in the post-op period, following standard surgical procedure, whether surgical or medical, avoidable or unavoidable, and which resulted as a result of surgical intervention. Patients were broadly classified into these 10 broad categories of neurosurgical patients. Forms were filled by the patient or his closest relative in case the patient was not able to do so. and under the guidance of the parents in case of minor patients. The forms at 4 times forms were filled. The preoperative scale were marked as W. The after notice of complication, the scale was marked as X. Then after management of complication, whether successful or not, the score was marked as Y. And finally, at follow-up, it was marked as Z. So when we subtract the W value from the X1, we get the what we can call the immediate impact of complication combined with surgery on the health-related quality of life. So total 1,302 patients filled the form. Ultimately, 1,286 underwent surgery, and out of which 212 developed complications, which was our target study group. Male to female ratio was 1.01. The overall rate of complication was 16.48%, and the mortality rate was 2.56%. And surgical complications constituted approximately 3/4 of all the complications. We found that brain tumors and vascular disorders had a higher risk of complication, relative risk of complication, followed by congenital malformations and neurological infections. And spinal disc and degenerative disease had the least relative risk of complication. When we applied our index score, we found that patients with brain tumor and vascular disorders not only had higher risk of complication, but had higher risk of greater fall in the health-related quality of life, followed by spinal tumors. The most common complications were respiratory complications, CSF leak, cranial nerve palsy, limb weakness, surgical site infection, meningitis, tumor recurrence, post of hydrocephalus, new onset seizures, and so on. So disease complication specific wise, we found that sudden onset cardiac arrest, followed by tumor bed hematoma, hydrocephalus, limb weakness, respiratory distress, meningitis, tumor recurrence had greatest impact on the health-related quality of life due to complication. When we applied our index scores to the being already followed Landriel scale, we found some disparity when taken as group wise. This is the line diagram showing average grading at admission, after complication, admission, and follow-up. And when taken as a group, intra-group variations were the most significant in all groups, and this is why we found the need for modification of this existing scale and including and quantification of health-related quality of life. Each line represents individual patients in each grade as per the Landriel scale. So this is for grade 1B, grade 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B, and grade 4. So coming to this discussion, our rate of complication was 16.48%, which was comparable to other studies. Relative risk of complications in brain and spine cases in various studies were varied from 2 to 4%. And obviously the rate of complication depended upon the definition of complication, the relative number of brain and spine cases, and relative number of elective and emergency cases. But in most of the studies, similar studies, it was found that grade 1A and grade 2B composed the bulk of the complications. So theoretically, as we have mentioned earlier, the maximum possible shift could be minus 1.594 to plus 1.594. So what is MCID? MCID is minimum clinically important difference, which the smallest difference in score in the domain of the interest that patient perceive as important, either beneficial or harmful, among this shift of minus to plus 1.594. So what we did, based on the various other studies done for other various diseases, we calculated the MCID value to be 0.2. So we total values we divided into 8 groups, starting from A to A, B, C, D up to H, and whether it was on the plus side or on the minus side, we assigned a sign of plus or minus. But we found that very few patients were there in the group FGH. So we combined these groups and made and named this at more than E plus. Sir, some disturbances is there, sir. Then we proposed a new Then we proposed a new complication grading on health-related quality of life, which with a window of 0.2 and A, B, C, D, E, and group O, which signifies no change, and it denotes mild to moderate, moderate to severe, and extremely severe fall in the health-related quality of life. And when we can combine our new complication grading based on health related quality of life and the already existing Landriel scale, which is treatment based, and after combining both of these, we get what we call modified Landriel scale, and we can project it like 3B and C minus 1A and capital B plus like this. So coming to the conclusion, health related quality of life scale gives an objective assessment and feedback in neurosurgical patients and also to the surgical team. The overall complication rate may vary depending upon the relative number of cranium and spine cases and emergency and elective cases. Sudden onset cardiac arrest, tumor bed hematoma, post-op hydrocephalus, limb weakness, respiratory distress most severely affects the health related quality of life. Take home message, these are some sayings which I found during my work. Surgeon is the most important clotting factor to emphasize on the importance of strict hemostasis. CSF is like love, it will find its way. So watertight dural closure should be a must in surgical practice. Plant the implants like you plant a tree. So to avoid any implant failure, proper hand wash or else the patient may be out of our hands. To emphasis on asepsis and antisepsis, because horsepower drives never compromises motor outcomes. And lastly, a neurosurgeon should be jack of all trades and master of neurosurgery, because he should have a basic training of ICU care and trauma management. So cardiopulmonary care is of as important as neurosurgery itself. These are my references, and we got our paper published in interdisciplinary neurosurgery, and it has been sent for UNESCO Equatorial Guinea International Prize for Research in Life Sciences also. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kunal. The paper is open for discussion. Hello?
Yes, sir. I am okay, sir.
Yeah. So any questions? We have 1 more minute.
Mr. Kunal, no, sir, you can continue this. No issue.
Yeah, please get.
Hello, Mr. Kunal.
Yeah, good morning, sir.
Yeah, the complications you have come across, the post-operative, the sequelae, I can see something else.
Yes, sir.
Any cognitive changes or behavioral changes patient pre-operatively, which is added to the pre-operative assessment, anything to add it?
Sir, first of
quality of life post-operatively. You think
yes,
about
sir.
complications, you considered any behavioral manifestations patients got through during perioperative procedures or
Yes, sir.
anything you noted?
So first scale was taken just before surgery in elective, the night before surgery in elective cases, and in emergency cases, these were taken just before surgery. And behavior was also taken into consideration, but our complication we defined as which was new onset. If it is present before surgery and it continued in after surgery also, so it was not considered a complication, sir.
Site of lesion makes any difference to your complications?
Obviously, sir, if the tumor is in the eloquent area, the risk of complication will be high, sir. And there is already existing Milan complexity grading, which defines the risk of surgery based on the nearby arteries or the size of the tumor or the location of the tumor. But this is basically for the individual patient, and each individual patient behaves differently in his health related quality of life. And we have chosen this Eurocall model because there is a lot of work on this in different parts of the world, and it varies from population to population. And we got this, it has its head office in Denmark, and we got the Telugu form for our patients, and we applied this to our institute, sir.
You have any long-term follow-up of these complications, more than 3 months?
Sir, this is the only shortcoming I found in my study, sir, because it was a limited time period prospective study. But I think the follow-up should be minimum of 6 months or 1 year to conclude more, sir. I think I accept this limitation of 3 months, sir.
Okay, thank you. I think it's time for the next paper.
Thank you, Dr. Kunal.
Thank you, sir.
Third speaker, Dr. A. Sunita, a study of NMO spectrum disorders in tertiary care hospital in South India. Dr. Sunita, stage is for you.
Sir, I'm ready, sir.
All other observers, please mute their mobiles or screen. Bring the speaker.
Sir, I'm not getting shared screen, sir.
Dr.
I
Kunal?
think we lost the
Yes,
host.
sir.
All
I
the
am logging out, sir.
Yeah, no, you don't log out. Just remove your screen share. That's all.
Yes, sir. Stop
Yeah.
sharing, sir.
Yeah. Dr. Sunita?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I'm done, sir.
Just sir.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Dr. Sunita, make it full screen. Yeah.
Sir, good morning, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are audible. Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir. I'm thankful to all for giving this opportunity. Today's my present. I'm Dr. Sunita from Department of Neurology, senior resident. Today's my study is a clinical study of neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorders in from a tertiary care center. And this is my outline of talk. And neuromyelitis optica disorders is an inflammatory demyelinating disease of CNS, clinically presenting as optic neuritis or longitudinally extensive myelitis or area postrema syndrome. And mostly it has a relapsing course of disease. And it also has extra opticospinal manifestations like acute disseminated encephalomyelitis like presentation, periependymal lesions involvement, diencephalonic and hypothalamic lesions. And it can also present as symptomatic cerebral lesions. And 30% of these cases may harbor lesions reminiscent of multiple sclerosis. And according to the revised criteria by Wingerchuk in 2015, which includes a core clinical presence of core clinical manifestations, which includes optic neuritis, myelitis, area postrema, or other brainstem syndrome, and radiological features like the presence of long segment involvement and antibody status for aquaporin positivity, and in NMOSD, it constitutes 20% of all demyelinating disorders in Indian series, and clinical spectrum of this NMOSD has not been well studied from Andhra Pradesh. And objectives of our study is to describe the varied clinical manifestations and radiological features of NMOSD and to determine the frequency of aquaporin positive antibody and MOG positive antibody status in our study, and to apprise the clinical outcomes and relapse prevention. So the material and methods, it was a prospective observational study conducted between May 2019 to December 2020. And after taking ethical committee approval and informed consent. And this is the inclusion criteria. Patients who are fitting for the core clinical manifestations and willing to participate were included. And patients having features like multiple sclerosis, ADM, sarcoidosis, malignancies, and paraneoplastic and infections were excluded. And not willing were also excluded. And totally 81 patients were screened and 28% were excluded due to varied reasons, and 53 cases were included in the study. So coming to the demographic data, in our study of 53 cases, 41 cases were females, 12 cases were females, a ratio of 3.4:1 between male and female, and the gender ratio in the aquaporin positive and MOG positive on both the negative cases, there was a female predominance. But out of 12 male cases, 9 cases showed MOG positive in our study. And coming to the age and seropositive status, mean age of onset. So in our study, 34% of cases were aquaporin positive, and they had a mean age of onset of 33, and 40% of cases were MOG positive, and they had a mean age of onset of 31, and 26% of cases were both negative, and they had mean age of onset 37. And clinical presentation of total cohort, 26% of cases, 26% of cases presented with myelitis, and 25% of patients presented with myelitis and optic neuritis, and 19% of cases presented with optic neuritis, and 11% of cases presented with optic neuritis and myelitis and extra opticospinal involvement. So clinical presentation and pseudostatus, in our case, aquaporin positive cases, a combination of optic neuritis and myelitis was seen in 33% of cases, followed by myelitis, which was seen in 27% of cases, and followed by optic neuritis and myelitis and extra opticospinal involvement in 22% of cases. In MOG positive cases, 33% of patients presented with optic neuritis, followed by combination of optic neuritis and myelitis. In both negative cases, 50% of cases presented with myelitis alone and optic neuritis, and followed by extra opticospinal involvement. And course of the disease, 61% of aquaporin positive cases showed relapsing course. 66.7% of cases of MOG positivity showed relapsing course. In our study, both the negative, seronegative cases showed a monophasic course of 64%. And clinical presentation, optic neuritis bilateral involvement was seen in 68% of cases, and unilateral involvement was seen in 32% of cases. Out of 38 cases of myelitis, 58% of cases presented as quadriparesis, 29% of cases present as paraplegia, and 10% of cases present as hemiplegia. And extraopticospinal manifestations, 50% of cases presented as area postrema involvement, and 32% of patients presented as acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, and 6% has a diencephalon, and 6% has narcoleptic features, and 6% has a combination of area postrema, diencephalon, and narcolepsy. This is the clinical MRI pictures of our patients showing optic neuritis, involvement of long segment optic neuritis and long segment quad involvement, long segment linear interrupted lesions, and white matter involvement, and periepidemial involvement of the ventricles.
Babi, அதான் babi போட்டேன் திருப்பி you are using computer audio ன்னு வந்துச்சு திருப்பி வந்து it says your camera is not detected ன்னு வருது.
Hello, am I audible? Hello? Right?
Madam, you can go ahead. No problem. You can go ahead.
You are audible.
Okay, sir. So areas of involvement in MRI, in aquaporin positive cases, 27% of cases showed cervical medullary dorsal involvement, and followed by 22% of showed cervical dorsal involvement. And in MOG positive cases, cervical dorsal was seen in 90%, and similarly dorsal-lumbar involvement was seen in 19% of cases. And in both seronegative cases, predominantly cervical dorsal was seen in 35% of cases. And extent of involvement, longitudinal contagious involvement in aquaporin positive cases was seen in 50% of cases, followed by longitudinal linear interrupted lesions, and some significant 16% of cases showed short segment involvement also. In MOG positive cases, 22% were showed long linear interrupted lesions. In both seronegative cases, 28% of cases showed longitudinal contagious lesions, and 28% of lesions showed longitudinal linear interrupted cases. So MRI orbit typical optic neuritis picture was seen in 20 cases. Out of 20 cases, 11 cases were MOG positive, 7 cases were aquaporin positive. And treatment details, all the initial events were treated with IV methylprednisolone. Among 18 cases of aquaporin positive, along with IV methylprednisolone, Plex was added in 6 cases, and along with Plex and rituximab was added in 1 case. And in MOG positive cases, Plex was added along with IV methylprednisolone in 1 case, and rituximab was added in 1 case. And in both seronegative cases, Plex was added in 3 cases, and Plex and rituximab was added in 2 cases. And these were maintained in aquaporin positive cases. 11 cases were maintained on azathioprine, and 3 cases were maintained on the rituximab, and 1 case on cyclophosphamide. And in MOG positive cases, 16 cases were maintained on oral steroids, and 3 cases were maintained on rituximab, 1 case on cyclophosphamide, and 1 case on rituximab and MMR. And in seronegative cases, 8 cases were maintained on oral steroids, 3 cases on azathioprine, 2 cases on rituximab, and 1 case on cyclophosphamide. Treatment of relapses. There were 11 relapses in aquaporin positive cases, and all the acute relapses were treated with IV methylprednisolone. Along with this, 2 cases needed Plex, and 2 cases needed rituximab. In MOG positive cases, 14 cases had relapses, and along with all are treated with IV methylprednisolone, and Plex was added in 3 cases, and rituximab added in 5 cases. And in seronegative cases, they were treated with IV methylprednisolone alone. And in maintenance of these relapses cases, rituximab was given in 4 cases, and MMF was given in 1 case, azathioprine was given in 5 cases, rituximab and MMF was given in 1 case. And in MOG positive cases, 8 cases were given rituximab, and steroids were given in 2 cases, MMF in 1 case, azathioprine in 1 case, and 1 case is maintained on MMF and IVIG, and 1 case on cyclophosphamide. In seronegative cases, 1 case is maintained on rituximab, and 1 case on oral steroids, and 2 cases on azathioprine. So potential risk factors of clinical relapse. So we had 61% of relapses in aquaporin positive cases and the 66 in MOG positive cases. And the cause for this was present 40% of cases had because of disease process, and 30% of cases because of financial constraints, and 17% of cases because of poor compliance, and 7% of cases because of associated comorbidities, and 6% of cases because of poor titration. And change in median EDSS before and after in seropositive and seronegative myelitis cases. Out of 11 cases, EDSS before was in aquaporin positive cases, before was 5.5 and after was 2. In MOG positive, it was 5.5 and 1. In both the negative, it is 3.75 and 1.5. So coming to discussion, in our study, female to male ratio was 3.1, and similar ratios were studied in were seen in study by Banwell et al. And Philly et al. In aquaporin positive cases, LETM was seen in 27% of cases in our study, and optic neuritis was seen in 5.6% of cases. When compared to Jarish et al. Study, it was 30 to 47% and 37 to 55%. And in our study, a combination of optic neuritis and LATM was seen more common, that is 33%. In MOG positive cases, optic neuritis was seen in 33% patients and LATM was seen in 9.5% in our study. And when compared to Jarish et al. Study, it was 33 to 64% of optic neuritis and 18 to 33% in LATM. So in aquaporin positive, relapsing course was seen in 61% of cases in our study, when compared to 80 to 90% in Jarish et al. Study and Von Pitt et al. Study. In MOG positive cases, in our study, we had more relapsing course. It is 66.7%, and when and the same 80% was seen in Jarish et al. Study. He has studied 50 cases of MOG positive for 4 years, and initially what thought to be a monophasic course, later on he observed that they had recurrences, and in his study it was 80%. And Pandit et al. From India has studied as monophasic course. So median EDSS before and after treatment in aquaporin positive was 5.5 and 2, and MOG positive it was 5.1, 5 and 1 in our study. So this lower disability scores in MOG positive than aquaporin positive probably favors good prognosis, as seen in studies done by Soto et al. And Ketil et al. So in our study, coming to discussion, in our study, 8 cases are on maintenance with the rituximab. In Jarish et al., they have given 3 cases, in 3 cases out of 9 cases, rituximab, and they have observed a declining rate of relapses. Ramanathan et al. Recommended rituximab in MOG positive cases, especially in early stages of myelitis, to prevent severe residual deficits. So role of rituximab in MOG positive cases as compared to aquaporin positive cases needs further study. And in our study, death was seen in 4 cases. 3 were aquaporin positive and 1 was double negative. The limitations of our study was, it was a short period of study, and annualized relapse rates could not be assessed because of this short period. And seronegative cases can be related to another etiologies such as paraneoplastic neoplasms or non-inflammatory conditions, and we have not checked for any novel antibodies. So like anti-GFA, glial fibril acidic protein, has been associated with opticospinal presentation. And conclusion, in our clinical cohort, MOG was associated more commonly encountered in seronegative NMOSD cases, and in seronegative cases require further autoantibody profiling to uncover any novel or hetero unknown antibodies. Relapse prevention in aquaporin positive cases, especially MOG positive cases, needs further emphasis. With the recent inclusion of rituximab infusion under our Aarogyasri scheme, the long-term prognosis of this disorder will favor change in near future. So these are my
Thank you, Dr. Sudhita.
Minutes.
There cannot be any discussion. We cannot allow any discussion in this paper. We'll go to the next paper. As we have crossed 12 minutes, we are not going to allow any discussion in this paper.
Next,
We'll go
fourth
into the next
speaker.
paper, please.
I invite Dr. Venkatesh. Dr. Venkatesh?
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, please request all others to mute. Lot of disturbance in between. Request all others to mute, please.
Sir, I'm unable to share my screen.
Madam, Sunita, madam, can you please remove your screen share?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Dr. Venkatesh?
Yes.
Is it- yeah, you can share.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. Myself, Dr. Venkatesh, DNB neurosurgery resident. My topic is differential expression of glial mesenchymal transition markers in cultured primary glioma cells. Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yes, carry on.
The median survival time in glioma varies according to the grade. In high-grade glioma, it is around 15 to 16 months. In low-grade glioma, it is 5 to 7 years. In low-grade, usually the low-grade gliomas eventually progress to high-grade glioma and leads to death. In glioma, even though similar histology, there is a difference in survival and recurrence rate in different grades of tumor. Some people with grade 4 tumor die early. Some people survive more time. Similarly, in grade 2, grade 3 also, some people come with early recurrence. Some people come with late recurrence. The tumor markers such as IDH1-2 mutation, 1p19q codeletion status have failed to provide information about progression of low-grade and high-grade gliomas, emphasizing the necessity for new and different prognostic and predictive indicators. The infiltrative phenotype has long been considered as a contributory factor for clinical aggravation of malignant glioma that manifest as tumor recurrence and therapeutic interactability. Such infiltrative features have been linked to the phenomenon of glial mesenchymal transition. So the concept of glioma cell culture evolved. Aim of a study is to compare proliferative index and its implication in survival of different grades of glioma patients, and to study glial mesenchymal transition markers in glioma. Methods. Glioma tissue from 45 patients were collected after ethics committee approval and cultured as primary cells in DMEF medium supplemented with fetal bovine, epidermal growth factors and fibroblast growth factors. Normally we collect two samples, one for HPE, one for culture. We will collect the samples within 2 hours and the glioma sample washed with PBS and chopped into pieces. This will be enzymatic dissolution with the trypsin and incubated at 37 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes with 5% CO2. We will add serum to neutralize the sample. The cell suspension is then strained with cell strainer. This will be seeded in T25 flask. Based on the population doubling time, cultured cells were categorized as high proliferative rate, that is having population doubling time less than 72 hours, and low proliferative rate, having population doubling time more than 72 hours. All the cultured cells were analyzed for presence of GFAP, vimentin, and Catherine twist CMAC. All these are glial mesenchymal tumor markers. The cell viability was measured after 48 hours of treatment with the indicated concentration of temozolomide to inhibit the growth. We further assessed the association of proliferation rate of gliomas with IDH1-2 mutation, 1p19q codeletion, p53 and MIB expression. Study methodology. This ongoing study. Patients were recruited from December 2018. It is interim analysis done on November 2020. Total 45 glioma samples sent for culture. Out of 45, 40 samples were put to culture. In this, 22 were grade 4 gliomas and 9 were grade 3 gliomas and 14 were grade 2 gliomas. Out of 40 samples, 19 samples were found to be have high proliferative cultures and 21 samples are low proliferative cultures. Results. We calculated different grades according to proliferative cult index. In grade 2, out of 12, 5 were low proliferative cultures, 7 were high proliferative cultures. In grade 3, 3 were low proliferative and 4 were high proliferative cultures. In grade 4, 13 were low proliferative cultures and 8 were high proliferative cultures. We calculated the progression-free survival and overall survival period in different grades of tumor according to the proliferative index. The progression-free survival period in months in grade 2 in high proliferative cultures is 10.28 months. In low proliferative cultures, it is 13 months. In grade 3 high proliferative cultures, the progression-free survival rate is 8.5 months. In low proliferative, it is 11.6 months. The overall survival period in different grades of tumors according to the proliferative index in months. In grade 2, in high proliferative, it is 15.8 months. In low proliferative cultures, it is 17.4 months. In grade 3, in high proliferative, it is 14 months. In low proliferative, it is 14.5 months. In grade 4, in high proliferative cultures, it is 12 months. In low proliferative, it is 14.3 months. There is a clear-cut difference in the overall survival and progression-free survival period according to the proliferative index in different grades of glioma. We also the frequency of IDH1/2 mutation 1p19q co-deletion status in different grades of glioma. These are expressed in grade 2, not in grade 4. But there is no clear-cut difference in the high proliferative and low proliferative cultures. That is, in IDH1/2 mutations were essentially found among grade 2 with negligible association to proliferation rate. Similarly, MIB1 expression was found exclusively in high grade, but no in low grade, irrespective of the proliferation status of glioma cultures. The IDH1/2 mutations and MIB1 are not any association with the proliferation rate. The implication of proliferative index in treatment. The cell viability was measured after 48 hours treatment with the indicated concentration of temozolomide. In grade 2, 3, 4, in all grades, high proliferative cultures need more concentration to inhibit the growth when compared with the low proliferative cultures. So the low proliferative cultures of grade 2, 3, and 4 tend to be more sensitive to temozolomide when compared with high proliferative cultures. So in high proliferative index patients, we can avoid temozolomide and we can think of other options directly. The glial mesenchymal transition markers, the GFAP, vimentin, encathalin, c-MYC, ecathalin. These are null to low expressed in low proliferative cultures, but all are strongly expressed in high proliferative cultures. However, grade 4 high proliferative cultures showed exceptionally strong distinctive ecathalin staining as compared to grade 2 and grade 3 of high proliferative cultures. Limitations of our study. It is short duration study. It is ongoing study. The study performed in a single center. Patients should be followed for further evaluation. Conclusion. There is a progression-free survival difference according to the proliferative index in grade 2 and grade 3 patients. That is, in low proliferative cultures, the progression-free survival period is high. There is an overall survival difference in grade 4 patients according to the proliferative index. That is, in high proliferative cultures, the overall survival period is low. And in low proliferative cultures of grade 2, 3, 4 glioma tend to be more sensitive to temozolomide when compared with high proliferative cultures. Notable variation in the expression of profile of GMT markers among low proliferative and high proliferative cultures. All these markers are strongly expressed in high proliferative cultures. Our conclusion is, in future, proliferative index may play distinctive role in prognosis and treatment in various subgroups of glioma. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Venkatesh, for your nice presentation. The paper is open for discussion. 1 minute discussion is allowed.
Did you study in the clinical setup the proliferation of these glial cells? Number one. Number two, is there any occasion to reflect this proliferation in terms of radiation therapy?
Yes, actually we send for culture, sir. We have KFRC. We have in KIMS we have one research center, sir. They will calculate the proliferative index, sir. With the proliferative index, we are calculating the clinical outcome with a proliferative index, sir. In some grade 2 patients, low proliferative cultures coming early with recurrence, sir, and these patients are needed radiotherapy and chemotherapy, sir. And similarly, in grade 4 patients, high proliferative cultures patients are they have low survival rate. They have poor prognosis. The main aim of study to further evaluate the different grades of tumor. Why some grade 2 patients are coming early and why some grade 4 patients are dying early, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Venkatesh. And now the time is up. We'll go for the next speaker.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Arvinda, profile of surgically managed temporal lobe epilepsy case series. Dr. Arvinda? Dr. Arvinda, please share your screen. Dr. Arvinda, is everything clear? Dr. Arvinda, make it full.
Arvindra, you have to unmute.
Yeah, please make it full screen. Dr. Arvinda, you can carry on your presentation.
அந்த ஷர்ட்டே போட்டுக்கோங்கள, நேத்து போ அந்த ப்ளூ ஷர்ட் போட்டுட்டு உட்காந்துலாம்ல. ரெடி பண்ணிட்டேன். 12:20 அந்த லெக்சர் ஏதோ ஓடிட்டு இருக்கு.
Dr. Arvinda, you have to unmute your screen. Dr. Arvinda, you have to unmute your screen.
Speaker log out.
Arvinda, there is a mic button left lower most of the screen. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Dr. Arvinda, you are able to see?
Yes, Arvinda, you are now you can speak. Dr. Arvinda, you are not audible.
நல்லா இருக்குங்க.
Sorry, doctor. We are unable to hear you. You need to unmute your screen. Yes, you can speak now. Please check with your mic. Hello. Dr. Arvinda, please check. We will go ahead with another next paper and we can come back to you. Okay. Dr. Nikhil.
Leave the screen.
Ma'am, Dr. Arvinda, remove your screen. Yeah. Dr. Nikhil.
Yes, good morning.
Yeah, you are audible. Please share your screen. Dr. Arvinda, please check your mic status.
Yes.
Till this paper is over. Nikhil, you can start.
Morning, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, please go ahead.
I thank all the organizers, respected teachers and my colleagues. Today my topic is efficacy of CSF CBNAT in the diagnosis of CNS tuberculosis. Introduction: India is home of world's largest tuberculosis burden, accounting for around 21% of the TB incidence globally. The most common presentation of CNS TB is meningitis, followed by tuberculoma, tuberculous abscess, and pot spine. Most patients with CNS TB will be treated with medical treatment alone, but a portion of these patients require surgical intervention. Diagnosis of CNS TB is of utmost importance as early diagnosis is required to reduce mortality and morbidity. Rich suggested a two-stage development of CNS tuberculosis. That is, first, tuberculous lesions called as rich focus develop in the brain during the stage of bacteremia. Shortly afterward and later, they rupture, and the growth of one or more of these lesions produce development of CNS tuberculosis. Rich focus may occur in the meninges, the subpial or subependymal surface of the brain, and may indeed remain dormant for many years. And scientific specific stimulus needed for rupture or growth of these lesions is still not completely understood. The type of the lesion by which these bacilli rupture into the CSF depend on the virulence of bacteria and immune resistance of the host. In TB meningitis, a thick gelatinous exudate develop around the basal cistern and Sylvian fissure and brainstem. And this may cause obstruction to the outflow from the fourth ventricle or indeed from cerebral aqueduct, and hydrocephalus frequently develops. Coming to tuberculomas, these are firm vascular spherical masses with sizes varying between 2 cm to 10 cm in diameter. They are well circumscribed and compressed the brain tissue. It shows edema and gliosis. These are some of the MRI images which show conglomerating appearance of tuberculomas. This CT scan shows a picture of tuberculous meningitis and MRI of spine showing Cox spine. Then coming to CBNAT, this is cartridge-based nucleic acid amplification test has now emerged as a tool for diagnosis of CNS TB. The CBNAT assay consists of a closed system that is based on real-time polymerase chain reaction, which requires minimal technical expertise in the diagnosis of TB and rifampicin resistance within 2 hours. In 2014, WHO has recommended CBNAT over the conventional tests that include conventional microscopy, culture, or histopathology for testing specific non-respiratory specimens, such as lymph nodes and other tissues from patients suspected of having extrapulmonary TB. However, this was conditional recommendation due to very low quality evidence available. In this study, we attempt to diagnose CNS tuberculosis by doing CBNAT test of CSF in patients radiologically suspected to have CNS tuberculosis. Aims and objectives to evaluate the efficacy of CSF CBNAT in patients of CNS tuberculosis. Materials and methods. All the patients admitted under Department of Neurosurgery with suspicion on MRI or CT brain of CNS tuberculosis like tuberculomas, TB meningitis, and pot spine between January 2019 to December 2019. For each patient, CSF sample was collected by lumbar puncture and sent for CBNAT at the time of admission. In the case of brain tuberculosis, excised specimen was sent for HPE, and in case of spine tuberculosis, transpedicular biopsy was taken whenever feasible. And CSF CBNAT was avoided in the patients in whom lumbar puncture was contraindicated. All the data was collected prospectively and analyzed. The limitations of CBNAT include the equipment should be under temperature control and annual calibration of the instrument is required. And the result of CSF CBNAT was correlated with the HPE report. Whenever HPE was not available, it was correlated with other markers like radiology and CSF ADA. Results: a total 28 cases were analyzed in this study. Out of 28 cases, 11 were Cox spine cases, 14 were suspected brain tuberculomas, and 3 were suspected TB meningitis. And out of 28, only 2 were positive for CSF CBNAT. Brain tuberculomas, out of 14 cases of suspected brain tuberculomas, 10 were operated and 4 were managed conservatively, out of which 8 were HPE proven, the HPE was consistent with tuberculosis infection, but among 14 brain tuberculosis infections, none was positive for CSF CBNAT. Coming to spine tuberculosis, out of 11 Cox spine cases, 10 were operated and 1 case was managed conservatively, but only 2 samples showed CSF CBNAT positivity. Among the 10 operated cases, transpedicular biopsy was taken in 6 cases, out of which 5 was consistent with tuberculosis infection and 1 was inconclusive. Total cases were 11, operative 10 and positive 2. The location was 2 cervical, 7 dorsal and 2 lumbar, and biopsy taken was taken in 6 samples and positive histopathological report was obtained in 5. TB meningitis, 3 patients presented with suspicion of TB meningitis with hydrocephalus for whom EVD was done and CSF CBNAT was sent. All of them had findings of TB meningitis on CSF analysis and CSF ADA was also raised. But for all 3 cases, CSF CBNAT was negative for tuberculosis. This is the pie diagram showing everything. The total cases studied were 28, out of which brain tuberculomas were 14, operated 10, histopathologically proven 8, but all of the brain tuberculomas had negative CBNAT. Spine 11 cases, operated 10, HPE proven was 4. The CBNAT was positive in 1 case which was operated, and the spine case which was managed conservatively had positive CBNAT. And tuberculosis meningitis, all 3 were CBNAT negative. All the patients were started on ATT after sending CBNAT. Patients who were conservatively managed were followed up at 1, 3 and 6 months, and all the conservatively managed patients of brain tuberculoma shows reduction in the size. Discussion: exact prevalence of CNS tuberculosis in India is not known, but it accounts for an estimated of 1% of all cases of TB, which equates to around 17,000 cases in India in 2014. This data was taken from WHO and Index guidelines, which were published in 2015. A definitive diagnosis of CNS tuberculosis depends on histopathology report. CNS tuberculosis can also be detected by CSF CBNAT. It can be done by smear microscopy in CSF sample, but it has low sensitivity. So CSF CBNAT was proposed as a tool to detect Mycobacterium tuberculosis early with increased sensitivity as compared to smear microscopy. The sensitivity of CBNAT in CSF has been variable among various studies. The pool sensitivity of CBNAT in extrapulmonary diseases in a meta-analysis was around 80.9%. Other studies show sensitivity ranging from 40.17% to 3%. Its use for diagnosis of TB meningitis has been endorsed by Index TB guidelines. The study was planned, but in our study, the percentage of CSF CBNAT in detection of CNS tuberculosis is only 7.14%, which is uncomparable with other studies done on other extrapulmonary tuberculosis. Conclusion: CSF CBNAT assay for CNS tuberculosis is not correlated with either the histopathological or radiological diagnosis in this study. However, CBNAT may have higher sensitivity and specificity in detecting tuberculosis other than CNS. Further studies and research are needed to be conducted in a large sample size to establish specificity and sensitivity of CSF CBNAT assay in CNS tuberculosis. My references.
Thank you, Dr. Nikhil, for your nice presentation. And there is a question from Dr. Rajesh, neurosurgeon. Why was CBNAT negative for tuberculomas?
Sir, actually, theoretically, we wanted to diagnose the tuberculomas based on the CSF CBNAT report, but it came as negative. That is what the study is about, sir.
Mr. Nikhil?
Yes, sir.
Is the timing of sample makes any difference with your positive yield? Because most of the time the cases have, I think, admitted in neurology or referred to you for further management, like meningitis, hydrocephalus. Usually tuberculomas usually not subjected to the surgical action unless again significant edema with ICT. So do you mean that sampling timing is one which decides your positive yield?
Sir, that in that case, in active tuberculous infection with hydrocephalus, it was directly referred to neurosurgery for operative procedures. That's why the timing was also early in cases of tuberculous meningitis. Yes, that postulation can hold true in case of spine tuberculosis.
Yeah. This compared to before patient landing with complications of tuberculosis, there is an ample time of period, I think, whether it is intervened or not. So does timing of sample makes any difference in your positive yield?
Sir, actually, as soon as the patient were presented with to neurosurgery, the CSF sample was sent.
Okay.
For both all the cases of either tuberculum spine cases or TB meningitis with hydrocephalus as well.
Dr. Nikhil, there is a last question from Dr. Hemal. Does the location of lesions in the spine tuberculosis affect the CBNAT results? This is the last question.
No, in our study, it does not, sir.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nikhil, for your nice presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, Dr. Vijay Shardi, sir. Dr. Vijay Shardi, sir.
Yes.
Sir, any query, sir? When you have raised your hand, something, anything you want to add?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are audible.
Yeah,
Sir.
no. I just my last question is how did you collect CSF from the spinal tuberculosis? Was it a LP or during surgery? And is it ethically right to collect the CSF from the spinal tuberculosis patient who has a spinal lesion?
Sir, we all the samples were collected by lumbar puncture only, sir. But for those for whom lumbar puncture is contraindicated, it's from the CSF CBNAT, sir.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Nikhil. We move on to next
Our
presentation.
last presentation, Dr. Arvinda. Please unmute and you can go ahead with your presentation.
Hello.
Yeah,
Am I
You are
audible?
audible.
you
Please
are
go ahead.
audible, doctor. You can go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry for the technical glitches. I'm Dr. Arvinda. I'm doing final year DM neurology in Narayana Medical College, Nellore. My topic for the today's presentation is the profile of surgically managed temporal lobe epilepsy, a case series from a resource limited setting. My outline of presentation will be like this: introduction, aim of the study, methodology, results, discussion, limitations, and conclusions. Coming to the introduction, epilepsy is defined as 2 or more unprovoked seizures occurring more than 24 hours apart. TLE, which is temporal lobe epilepsy, it is the most common form of epilepsy worldwide. And anterior temporal lobectomy for medically refractory TLEs secondary to medial temporal sclerosis is the most commonly performed surgical procedure in many of the comprehensive epilepsy centers. Surgery is ideally directed towards complete seizure freedom without or very minimal cognitive and functional deficits. India, which has 1.2 billion people, and still there are 1 million medically refractory epilepsies, and among them, about half of the patients are potential surgical candidates. Coming to the aims of the study, we would like to stress the importance of pre-surgical workup, utilize all the clinical, radiological, and electrophysiological information to localize the ectal onset zone, and the importance of surgery in drug refractory epilepsy in achieving AED withdrawal and to decrease the seizure frequency and to improve the quality of life. This is the prospective observation study conducted from January 2019 to September 2020. The sample size was 17. All the patients attending neurology and neurosurgery outpatient department and inpatient departments of Narayana Medical College were studied. The inclusion criteria were all temporal lobe epilepsy patients who were labeled as drug refractory epilepsies and managed surgically were followed up for a minimum period of 10 months. The exclusion criteria was all extratemporal epilepsies and temporal lobe epilepsies managed medically. And ethical committee approval was taken and informed consent from the patients was taken. Hello.
Audible, please go ahead, madam.
Yes. We studied 17 patients who underwent epilepsy surgeries over a period of 10 months duration. Detailed history of antecedents, semiology of the seizures, and neuropsychiatric assessment with Wessler's memory scale and NIMHANS neuroassessment battery was performed in all the patients preoperatively, and MRI was performed using 3 Tesla mission. We have done epilepsy protocol including T1, T2, and FSPGR, ASL sequences, and 3D kernel flare in all the patients. And in some patients, when we couldn't lateralize the semiology, these patients underwent FDG PET in swims. And scalp electroencephalography was performed with Nicolette 32-channel EEG recording. And video EEG recording was done with 64-channel Nicolette channel recording. And the electrodes was placed according to International 1020 system. And all the patients who were admitted for video EEG recording were tapered and stopped the AEDs before recording of the video EEG for better recording of the seizures. And radiological and electrophysiological concordance were studied, and any red flags in the diagnosis were noted. Histopathological examination of the resected region was sent to NIMHANS. All the patients were monitored for any complications in the perioperative period, and all the patients who underwent ATL, anterior temporal lobectomy plus amygdala hippocampectomy, functional outcome study was performed with ILE classification of outcomes, and the outcome was recorded in terms of freedom from the disabling seizures and health related quality of life, cognitive function, and social adaptation was studied. So statistical data was analyzed and expressed in terms of percentages. These are the results. Our study distribution contained the age group ranging from 20 to 54 years. The majority of the patients were lying between 21 to 30 years of age. And in 17 patients, majority of them are female, and all 17 patients were having social factors like they were school drops, widowed, and marriage failures, and left jobs like that. And the age of the seizure onset was 14.41 with standard deviation of 6.8 years, and mean duration of epilepsy prior to surgery was 15.29 years. And antecedents were present in 8 patients with the history of febrile seizures in 4 and encephalitis in 1, and perinatal insult was present in 1. Family history of seizures were present in 2 patients, and history of GTCS was present in 14 patients, and history of focal seizures were present in 17 patients, and history of arrest was seen in 12, aura in 10, and automatisms were present in 11, and abnormal neuropsychiatric assessment with verbal memory impairment is seen in 9 patients. Coming to the semiology, mesial temporal semiology was present in 11 patients, and neocortical semiology was present in 6 patients. We could localize from the semiology as right temporal epileptogenesis in 7 patients and left temporal epilepsy in 10 patients. Scalp EEG recordings was performed. It was showing temporal IEDs in 11 patients, and extratemporal IEDs and bilateral IEDs were present in 6 patients. Ictal IED types, type 1 Ebersol classification. Type 1 was present in 11 patients, and type 2 and type 3 are present in 6 patients. Invasive EEG recording was performed in 1 patient, and WADA test was performed in 1 patient. Coming to the MRI findings, in MRI, we could see sclerosis in 12 patients, and dysplasia is seen in 5 patients. Cavernoma was seen in 1 patient, and secondary MTS was seen in 1 patient. Dual pathology was seen in 5 patients. MRI was negative in 3 patients. These are the histopathological examination. There was dual pathology was seen in 11 patients, and sclerosis in 12 patients, focal cortical dysplasia in 5 patients, and we could do right temporal dissection in 10 patients and left temporal dissection in 7 patients. Postoperative complications, there was 3 patients who suffered from fever after surgery. There was partial hemianopia, which was seen in 4 patients, and irreversible facial nerve weakness and hemiparesis was seen in 4 and 3 respectively. After 10 months of follow-up, we could withdraw AEDs or taper AEDs in 13 patients, and social independence was acquired in 15 patients. This is the classification of ILE classification of outcomes. In 11 patients, we could acquire class 1 of outcome, and class 2 was obtained in 4 patients, and class 3 in 2 patients. This is the case 1. This is a 45-year-old male born to non-consanguineous couple There was habitual seizures from 22 years of age. Minor events are occurring in 8 to 10 per month. There was arrest, automatisms, bimanual automatism lasting for 1 to 2 minutes, postictal nose wiping with right hand, and major episodes were associated with deviation of head to right and ictal cry, followed by generalized tonic-clonic seizures. He was using levetiracetam, carbamazepine, and clobazam. The diagnosis was focal seizures with impaired awareness with secondary generalization. The ictal epileptogenesis is right hemispheric, predominantly mesial temporal versus temporal neocortical. The MRI was showing right temporal sclerosis, and ASL was showing hypoperfusion in the right mesial temporal region. This is the EEG. EEG was showing right temporal discharges located over the T4 region with phase reversal. This is the case 2. This patient is showing cavernoma in the right temporal region. This is the case 3. He is a 19-year-old male. This patient is having apparent cyst originating from the occipital horn of the lateral ventricle, and it is showing secondary MTS also. This is the ictal recording in intraoperative ECG monitoring. There was ictal EEG epileptic discharges located over the contact 1 and contact 2. This is the postoperative recording. There are no epileptiform discharges. And this is the case 4. This is an interesting case. This is a 34-year-old female born to non-consanguineous couple, no antecedents, presented with no antecedents in the form of family history, presented with seizures since 12 years of age. There was history of febrile seizures at 3 years of age. There was aura in the form of tongue and fear. And ictus was associated with bimanual automatisms and lip smackings and lasting for 3 minutes. Current treatment was on clobazam, carbamazepine, and levetiracetam. This was the MRI. It was not showing that much changes in MRI. And in the same patient, we could see right temporal spikes along with left temporal spikes. So we could, if we want to operate on her, we need to confirm whether the epileptic zone is right or left. So we have done invasive monitoring. This is the trajectory in which we have performed invasive monitoring. And in the invasive monitoring, we could see the epileptic zone is mainly from the right temporal. This is the temporal lobe epilepsy. This is mainly because it could be divided into mesial temporal and lateral temporal. Age at the first seizure influences the semiology of the temporal lobe. Mesial temporal lobe focus in the younger patients, and neocortical focus can be seen in older patients. Coming to the limitations, the sample size was low. Long-term follow-up was needed in all the patients. Conclusions: though there are 1 million people who are medically refractory epilepsies, of which nearly half are potentially surgical candidates, surgery remains a therapeutic option for patients who are medically refractory epilepsies. Comprehensive pre-surgical evaluation, including EEG, video EEG, should be done. And these patients are likely to get benefit from the surgery. And majority of the patients who are not seizure-free experienced at least substantial reduction in the seizure frequency. And a positive long-term outcomes with reduction in the anti-epileptic medication and significant improvement in the quality of life after epilepsy surgery is possible in many of the patients, especially with hippocampal sclerosis and who underwent anterior temporal lobectomy. Dr. Sai Kiran sir, he is my acknowledgement. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aravinda. I think you have crossed almost 11 minutes. We cannot allow any discussion in this moment of time. And the participants.
Now I thank all chairpersons for concluding this award paper, SWIMS award paper category. Thank you, everyone.